Hello, and welcome back to Eric Likes Animals podcast. I'm your host, Eric Mahan, and I'm here to chat with you guys today about some environmental news stories and, of course, animals. So, why don't we jump right into it and start out with some environmental news stories happening around the world. The first article I'm going to talk to you guys about is how a 4D printed seed is helping study soil. So, first off, soil is super important. I mean, it's what plants need. All right, plants need soil to stay nice and healthy. It's full of electrolytes. Just kidding. It's full of a lot of good things. All right, it's full of water, nutrients, and is home to billions of organisms from bacteria, fungus, all of which help out plants grow, and of course helps control flooding issues and all that sort of stuff, and helps break down plant matter into carbon and also helps store carbon that plants capture. It just does a lot of stuff, okay? And unfortunately, soil is under threat due to rising temperatures and biodiversity loss because of climate change. In fact, they say half of the topsoil in the world right now has most likely been lost in the last 150 years due to erosion. And that can happen from compaction, so all the construction equipment that we use, cars, buildings, we've created a very unnatural ecosystem, and in those areas, soil degrades and doesn't really have a chance to come back, which means soil nutrients are lost and plants lose a lot of helpful things. So that's the problem. Scientists at a soft robotics lab in Italy, however, think they have a solution. They designed the first ever 4D printed seed-inspired soft robot. The idea is the robot seed mimics the movement and performance of a natural seed. This seed will help act as a sensor for monitoring pollutants, CO2 levels, temperature, and humidity all within the soil. Pretty cool. The structure of it is based off of South African geraniums, and the reason why they chose that shape is in response to how it deals with humidity in the environment. The seed can autonomously move around in a terrain or surface to penetrate the soil fairly easily, and that just means that the seed then can explore the soil and penetrate inside even further fractures and be able to discover the humidity changes and all the other different things that they're trying to study with the soil. So that's kind of why they chose that seed. It was kind of the perfect combination of being able to use the shape to get through the soil more evenly, and it's really good at picking up a bunch of different scenarios. Basically, the seed was created using 4D printed structures that create a dynamic morphological change under environmental stimuli, which means that the structure itself can change depending on the different situations happening within its environment. Also, just in case you were thinking, what if they left it somewhere and say, I don't know, an elephant or some other large animal were to step on this very fancy seed? Wouldn't that destroy the poor little thing and all of this research? Well, luckily, this little 4D printed seed is actually pretty strong. It can lift about 100 times its own weight. I don't know how they tested that one out, but they're just trying to show off how strong this little seed is that they can put out into the environment. It's made out of a biodegradable polymer, and it activates using oxygen plasma to increase water attracting abilities. So hence that portion that will help explain how much humidity is in the soil. The invention itself can be battery-free wireless tool for environmental topsoil monitoring and is a low-cost system to collect soil data to help us better understand the environment that plants are living in and how it's changing. That way we are able to, hopefully, stop it. And it's all thanks to a little robot in the shape of a seed. Next up, speaking of seeds and nuts, flying squirrels in China have discovered a clever new trick on how to store nuts for longer. So in China, there are these two species of tropical flying squirrels that have worked out a way to nibble grooves around the nuts that they collect to store them between tree branches, not in the ground like you and I's squirrels are doing in the backyard. So these flying squirrels in China developed this clever way to hide their nuts, chewing grooves on them so that they can be stored in the tree branches. It kind of makes a little notch and kind of holds it into place. Now, this unusual behavior is seen in 2 species of squirrels in a tropical rainforest. And scientists are saying that the concept of storing these seeds up on the trees is actually a better way of preserving them than burying the nuts in the moist forest floor. So this was discovered by using about 32 infrared cameras across 13.5 acres of rainforest, where they found about 151 nuts wedged between tree branches. Most of the nuts were stored between 5 and 8 feet off the ground. And the types of squirrels are the Indo-Chinese flying squirrel and the party-colored flying squirrel. And they will nibble the grooves on the nuts and adjust how the nuts are positioned between Y-shaped tree branches that will kind of hold the nut into place. And it makes sense, okay? If you're in a tropical environment, pretty much how rainforests work a lot of time is if the opportunity arises and the conditions are right, and say there's a break in the tree canopy and light's coming through, seeds germinate so quickly. So these flying squirrels have discovered ways to basically hold off these nuts from starting to germinate and then becoming a tree and, well, for all intents and purposes, making them lose their nuts. And then finally, over here in the States, there's a Mormon cricket plague that is invading parts of Nevada and Idaho. And for certain people in that area, it is making their skin crawl. So the Mormon cricket are these flightless, ground-dwelling insects that migrate in massive bands. Now, first up, they're not actually crickets. They do kind of resemble fat grasshoppers, but these guys are actually more related to katydids and things like that. Now, these guys are just swarming roadsides and pretty much eating everything in sight. And besides being a little bit annoying in that they're covering all the roads, the biggest issue with them is that they actually stink really bad. And when people are driving down the roads, it's getting all over their cars. And if that's not making it bad enough, it's actually making the roads really slick. You've all heard of black ice. What about cricket ice? Yeah, not the safest or the best smelling issue to be dealing with. And you would think being hit would keep these Mormon crickets off the road. But these Mormon crickets actually really like to eat protein. So, yeah, seeing their buddies get run over a car is really just a dinner bell for them, which means that more just keep swarming into this area. Eventually, the plague will die down, and obviously there's a bunch of ideas for people on how to get through it, but for right now, it's just bearing down and hoping it will end soon. And also, hopefully you don't have too many issues going down the road and your car won't smell bad for too long. After all, let's be real, the real victims are probably the crickets as well as the road workers, who are also probably pretty upset that they're going to have to clean all this up afterwards. And that is your environmental news. All right, moving on to our main topic, the creature feature. So for today's creature feature, we're going to be talking about the Torrent Duck. Why have I chosen this duck, you may ask? Well, first off, being honest, I was actually just recently watching a nature documentary that had one on the other day. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is by watching that nature documentary and seeing that Torrent Duck, it brought back a lot for me. Because the Torrent Duck has a very special place in my heart. Not because I ever had the opportunity to work with them, they're actually quite rare, but because it was the very first animal I actually had to ever write a paper on when I was going for my bachelor's degree in college. So it was kind of a fun, special moment because it was like, wait a second, I'm writing a paper on a duck for school? I mean, granted, we probably all did that in first grade, but this was an actual science paper on natural history and all that. But it was just this cool, I'm here for college for environmental zoology and all that sort of stuff. And that was my first kind of dive into that area. So Yeah, super important animal, special animal for me, not just because of the documentary, but honestly because it reminded me of the beginning of my zoological venture, let's just say. But enough about me. Let's talk about the Torrent duck. So, the Torrent duck can be found high up in the Andes Mountains of South America, sometimes being found around 5,000 feet above sea level, and they love living in fast moving creeks and rivers. Hence why they're called torrent ducks. Torrent, if you don't know, means fast moving streams and creeks. Now, the torrent duck is about 16.93 to 18.11 inches, or about 43 to 46 centimeters in length. And they have about a wingspan of 22 inches, or about 55.88 centimeters. However, females do normally have a slightly smaller wingspan than males, but that's about average. And of course, they weigh about 0.69 to 1.06 pounds, or about 315 to about 481 grams. And they can live about 18 years. So, basic statistics on that. Let's move on to how these ducks look, because they're definitely a very cool looking duck. Torrent ducks are a duck species that has a very sleek body, extremely powerful legs, and webbed feet, a strong tail, and very durable claws. All of these help give the torrent duck the ability to survive in these fast moving streams in which any other duck species would just get slammed against a rock or washed downstream in a second, and yet these guys are powerful enough to swim up even the most powerful of these rivers. Now, the torrent ducks are also extremely dimorphic, so there is not a chance you can mess up IDing which one is male and which one is female. However, they actually look so completely different that for many people, it looks like there's two different duck species living there. But it's actually just a pair, and now I'm going to tell you how you can tell the difference. The males have a white head and neck with a black stripe across their eye and down its back. They also have a dark kind of underbody with some dark green iridescent wings. And on those wings, they have spurs, which is used to fight off others from their territory or trying to outcompete other males for breeding success. And if you don't know what a spur is, it's kind of a little claw-like appendage that's on their wing. A lot of birds do actually have this, and the reason why a lot of times it's called a spur is even though this is on a wing, a lot of birds have spurs on the back of their foot, right where a cowboy spur would be. So that's kind of the reason why they named it that way. Now, females, on the other hand, have a gray head and neck. The body of the female is mostly black with some gray line feathers in there, but what makes the females really stand out is the underside of them, because they have this awesome looking crimson red coloration, which makes them look very different from the males. Now, the wings of the female, like I said earlier, are slightly smaller, and their spurs are also smaller as well, mainly because they're not doing much fighting with others with it, but they still have it just in case. Also, the female's tail is white with some black stripes. Now, both sexes of the ducks have a very distinctive bright red bill, however. It is long and narrow, soft but jagged, making it a perfect tool for these ducks to search under rocks in the fast-moving streams for invertebrates like larvae, crustaceans, snails, you name it. If it's small and wiggling in that creek, these ducks want to snack on it. Now, the torrent duck feed in a variety of ways in these streams. If it's shallow and not too turbulent, it can wade out and search under rocks for its snacks like you would see a number of other ducks do. But they can also sit underneath waterfalls, waiting for anything to maybe get tossed up the stream and fall over the waterfall. The duck is there to catch them, to eat them, not to save them. Now, the other main feeding technique, and the one that really shows off these birds' skills, however, is just simply they will dive into rapids. And I'm saying expert whitewater rafting rapids. Ones that even the best whitewater rafters may poop their pants a little when they see them. But not our friend the torrent duck, because these ducks can swim through the current and flip over and search around for dinner underwater in these things. The torrent ducks are extremely strong swimmers and divers, and because of this, they don't really rely on flying too much. They have been known to fly several meters above the surface of the river to get from one part to another sometimes, but really, it's their powerful legs, and it pushes them through this water. And they will even nod their heads a little bit as they're swimming to help kind of break through the force of the water coming down on them. As I also talked about earlier, they're small bodies, perfectly designed, sleek, able to slip down into the water, but also importantly, through a waterfall. And along with those sharp claws, they can help cling onto slippery rocks and actually swim up a waterfall like it's nothing. They, of course, also have these specialized tails that are very strong to help direct their movements in the water. Because if you ever went whitewater rafting or any sort of river canoeing or anything like that, if you hit a strong pocket of water, it takes sometimes all of our might just to direct where we're going. And these guys aren't just going with the river, they're going up the river. But even with all those skills, life is still tough. In fact, for the most part, except maybe some large birds of prey, not much is known for what would be considered a predator to the torrent duck. Except maybe some larger fish might go after their young. But for the most part, they think that the main predator, so to speak, of the torrent duck in the end is just the habitat itself. It's just so tough that that is the thing that helps control their population. The habitat makes it hard for any sort of predator to be up there, honestly. Any other predator would be crazy to go after these ducks who swim in these crazy rapids, okay? It's not for the faint of heart, so why would a predator risk its life just for a duck dinner? There's probably an easier duck species down the mountain anyway that is 100 times easier to get after. Although, interestingly enough, torrent ducks are known as very cautious birds, normally swimming kind of halfway in the water as they go and freaking out and diving in as soon as they would get spooked by a noise, which I might add is pretty impressive hearing anything over the raging river. Now, as for the breeding season of the torrent duck really relies depending on what part of the Andes Mountains the pair of ducks are at. For example, the more northern ducks will lay eggs in February, the middle of the Andes it will be April, and the southern portion it could be even as late as September, early October, that they would lay their eggs. The Andes, it's a long mountain range that heads directly north to south, which means a variable amount of climate, which means a variable amount of boom seasons, dry seasons, all that sort of stuff. So they're only going to lay the eggs at the most opportune time based on the location that they're found at. But what they do all have in common is how their love story begins. Male torrent ducks use distinct postures as part of their courtship. They will normally repeatedly bow, rapidly flap their wings, and kick up water with their legs, which you may think looks like they're throwing a temper tantrum. The courtship of the ducks will also include some courtship vocals as well. The male calls are normally a higher pitch whistle, which is so loud it can be heard even over the turbulent river, while the female's call is more of a deeper booming call or quack. The two ducks during courtship will also swim around each other sometimes, raising out of the water, and will even snap at each other with their bills during courtship. And as long as no one decides to stop or leave during this courtship, that's it. They're paired for life. Now, like I said before, depending on where you're at, the egg-laying season can happen at very different times. However, the nests themselves are normally all the same. They're normally well hidden and normally placed in deep crevices. And they're normally near waterways or up in a hollow tree or cave nearby. They can be anywhere between 9 and 60 feet on a cliff above a river. The female can lay 2 to 5 eggs, and they are fairly large compared to the female's body. In fact, a clutch of eggs she lays can weigh up to half her body weight. The incubation of these eggs is 43.5 days, which is actually quite a lot for a bird, especially since most birds will normally hatch after 25 to 30 days. The reason for this long incubation is to ensure a more developed duckling when they hatch, so that they can be ready to swim and survive the harsh environments that they're coming in to deal with right off the bat. The females are really the only ones who will sit on the nest as they incubate, but both the male and the female will actually end up taking care of the young when they do hatch. Now, after they hatch, it's sort of leap of faith time when it comes to your parents. Because the reason why the height above the river was so important to mention with the nest is because when the chicks hatch out, the female will then fly down to the river and start calling her young, who will then have to leap from their nests, possibly 60 feet, into a raging river below. Welcome to the world, little ones. Luckily, they don't weigh a lot, and because they're covered in down, that slows their fall to the river. And if they do have a big bad splash down and get swept down the river a little bit, the parents will go after them to ensure they get back up with the rest of the group. They will then learn a lot about how to be a Torrent duck from their parents, because they can't solely rely on their obviously amazing talent that they can hit the water running right off the bat from 60 feet in the air, because there's a lot more to living up that high in the Andes in these cold, fast-moving streams. But within a year's time, they will hit sexual maturity and go out on their own and try and find their own territory and start their dance to find their own mate. Now, moving on to the conservation status. The IUCN Red List has them listed as least concern, population trend, decreasing. So the overall total numbers is still a good amount of numbers, but we are losing them. So still, you got a lot of ducks, but if something doesn't happen soon, we're about to have some issues. Now, the reason for the issues are namely environmental problems, okay? They have the environmental pollution issues, which I know sounds shocking that there's pollution on the top of these mountains in these rivers, but yeah, pollution gets up that way. From humans, they're up there as well as just gas and fumes from cities and stuff wafting up there. All of that is causing all kinds of pollution that then gets into the waterways. Also, of course, habitat destruction, lumber, all of that sort of stuff is kind of tearing down some of these pristine mountain ranges, as well as competition for food from introduced trout. People place trout up there like we do here in the States, but unfortunately up there, these trout are out competing these ducks and eating all the insects and invertebrates that they rely on. And another big one, global climate change. The group of animals around the world that we're seeing have the hardest time with global climate change is actually mountain species. All right. And the reason why is their habitat is so small to begin with. Okay. You're having species, some species, the entire species is just found on the top of this one mountain range. Luckily for the Torrent duck, it's a whole slew of mountains within the Andes Mountains, but you get my picture. Now, the problem is it's warming up, which means the temperatures are rising on the mountains as well, which means food and other resources are migrating up the mountain to stay in the cooler climate. They're losing habitat because of the warming of the earth and the different climates and the droughts and all of that sort of stuff. And these animals are being pushed higher and higher up in the mountains, and a lot of them are running out of space. Or there's just not enough room for what would be considered a healthy population anymore. So yeah, that's a big one. But not the main one I want to talk to you about today, because the main one I want to talk to you about today is the damming of mountain rivers for hydroelectric purposes. So dams, all right? We've talked about dams before, and I have used them a couple times for a number of our animals, but this one I think is a little bit different, and I'll tell you why. Because for a lot of the other dam issues, for some of the fish that it was blocking their waterways and they weren't able to migrate, obviously the easiest solution there was creating kind of a side swipe or fish channels or something like that. In this instance, that doesn't work, and I'll tell you why. Let's look at the habitat these ducks are from, okay? Fast-moving, cold waterways, okay? This is some of the freshest water because it's coming straight from the mountain. It's either snowmelt or it's coming from springs. It is raging, it is fast, it is cold. And what that means is fast and cold means lots of oxygen. It's a healthy, pristine stream, which means that there is a lot of invertebrates that is the only spot that they're going to be able to survive in, okay? Cold water can handle more oxygen. Fast moving water means that there's more oxygen being put in there. Even if there's not a lot of plants in these rivers and creeks, it doesn't need it. It is just turning and constantly putting more and more oxygen in, which is why these invertebrates are there. And why these invertebrates are there is why these ducks are there. So you have these fast-moving streams and creeks at the top of these mountains, very fresh, very cold, very fast-moving. Okay, you build a dam. All of a sudden, the fast, cold water is not so anymore. Because what happens is dams block off these fast-moving waters, and they become kind of big lakes or reservoirs behind the dam itself. Because obviously, for a dam to make enough electricity, you need a lot of water to kind of build up behind it, and then you're releasing the water through the dam to turn the turbines to create the electricity. So yeah, that's kind of what happens there. So you do need a fast-moving creek because that normally means that there's a lot of water that is being constantly supplied, but you're putting a dam in the way because you don't want all that water to just race down the hill as quickly as it can. You want to save it up and use it to turn your turbines and have enough water behind it to do it. And by doing that, the water isn't turning up as frequently, which means the oxygen rate goes down. It's sitting in one spot for longer, which means it's kind of warming up a little easier. And one of the other big things is there's a ton of sediment that then is collecting because the water is racing down this mountain, and then all of a sudden, boom, it hits a wall. And all that sediment that normally would be coming down the mountain and actually helping feed organisms like different algae and then like the different kind of microorganisms that then feed the bigger organisms and provide food for aquatic plants is being stomped up there as well. So not only is it affecting the Torrent Duck, but pretty much everybody downstream as well is not getting all these nutrients. And all those nutrients, you would think, well, at least they're still up there. No, they're building up and they're becoming toxic and it's becoming sediment, which means that it is no longer the same habitat that it was. You took a fast, cold, moving stream and turned it into just a big puddle up on a mountain. And the ducks can't live there. The food can't survive there, which means they can't live there. And that's why it's a little bit different than the other animals, because the other animals can survive in multiple conditions, and you could put a fish elevator system or a side pass or something like that just to get them around, and that's kind of the big issue for a lot of other species. But for this Torrent duck, it is not so much that it can't get over the dam, but the dam completely changes their environment. So in the end, the dam just can't really stay. But we need to think of something here, right? So what should we do? Obviously, ultimate survival for the Torrent ducks are just to take down all the dams up there. But then you have to look at the human impact, because you can't look at conservation without the human impact. And with taking down these dams, that is a loss of power. And the loss of power means a lot of people go without needs, okay? It's not their fault. They live there. They're just trying to survive. So let's not be mean to them. So things that we can do, obviously, alternative electrical stuff. So like solar panels, bird-friendly wind turbines. I want to emphasize that one. There are bird-friendly wind turbines. They're not as big as the ones you normally see, because obviously wind turbines have their own set of issues against birds, and we don't want to trade one bird problem for another bird problem. But yeah, so those are some different alternatives to electricity besides the dams themselves. But if we really, really are hopped up on loving dams and doing hydroelectric stuff, there's so many new technology out there and just cool ideas that are just being started or actually have been out in a while that are so less intrusive than just one big old concrete dam. So one example is the concept of using the already fast-moving stream there with pretty much minimalistic tampering with the environment, where you can have a tube set along the side of the creek. So in the end, it's just a tube. You will have to anchor it there, but fish and stuff can flow through it, and in no way whatsoever is it blocking anything because you want the water to flow naturally through this tube. Now, this tube is kind of shaped like a T, where it basically has it where water can go just straight through it. But coming out of the water is kind of the other part of the T. Kind of hard to describe this, but it's an upside down T. Water can go through it, and the force of the water running through the bottom portion of this tube forces air up through the tube. And in the top of the tube, you can have a small wind turbine that the force of the water flowing through it actually turns it, creating electricity. Now, it in no way is going to provide the same amount of electricity as a major dam, but you can place multiple then of these across and down creeks. So instead of having one big impressive thing, you can have very minuscule small things scattered around, not causing a big impact on the environment, but still collecting a ton of energy. And instead of manipulating the environment to work for us, we simply use what is already there, which will not just let the electricity flow, but the water flow fast and efficiently as well, keeping not just us, but the very cool, amazing Torrent Duck happy for years to come. And that's our show. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the Torrent Duck. As always, make sure to check me out on my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok pages, as well as YouTube. I've had it for a while, but I'm slowly trying to upload the backlog of podcasts onto that. I'm trying to make sure that all the new podcast episodes go out onto YouTube as well. I mean, it's still just audio with the artwork, but yeah. So also make sure to check out YouTube, Eric Likes Animals as well. And of course, if you don't do social media at all, you can always reach out to me at ericlikesanimals@gmail.com. And once again, thank you guys for listening. I really do hope that you enjoyed the Torrent Duck, a very special bird in my own heart, a good symbol on my beginnings of zoology and all that fun stuff. And look at where we are now. I got a podcast. Very exciting. Anyway, thank you guys. And as always, I'll see you next time.